You think you know where the worst Nazi atrocities took place? Auschwitz, Dachau, Bergen-Belsen, names that echo through history as monuments to human evil. But what if I told you that some of the most chilling Nazi crimes didn't happen in Germany at all? What if the Third Reich's reign of terror extended far beyond European borders, operating in secret on American soil, while the US government turned a blind eye? This is the story they don't want you to know. The story of Camp Hearn, Texas, where 400,000 German prisoners of war were held on American soil during World War II. But this isn't just another tale of wartime imprisonment. This is the horrifying account of how fanatical Nazi prisoners established their own secret tribunal, hunting and executing fellow Germans they deemed traitors, all while American authorities either didn't know or didn't care. Welcome to the darkest chapter of America's home front, where a piece of the Third Reich operated in the heart of Texas, and where two ordinary Americans stumbled upon a conspiracy of murder that the government desperately wanted to keep buried. Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will shatter everything you thought you knew about World War II on American soil. This isn't just history. It's a warning about what happens when ideology becomes more important than humanity, even in the land of the free. August 15th, 1945. The war in Europe has been over for 3 months, but in the scorching heat of East Texas, another kind of war is just beginning. Camp Hearn sprawls across 2,000 acres of pine forest and cotton fields, 40 miles northwest of Houston. To the casual observer driving past on Highway 6, it looks like any other military installation. Rows of wooden barracks, guard towers, administrative buildings, all surrounded by barbed wire and patrolled by American soldiers. What they can't see from the road is that this isn't a training facility for American troops. It's a prison camp housing 4,800 German prisoners of war, men captured from the Afrika Korps, the Atlantic Wall, and the final desperate battles in the fatherland itself. The existence of these camps is one of America's best-kept secrets. While the public focuses on the boys fighting overseas, the government has quietly established over 500 POW facilities across the United States, holding more than 400,000 German, Italian, and Japanese prisoners. The official story is simple. These men are being held according to the Geneva Convention, treated humanely, and put to work on farms and in factories to support the war effort. The reality is far more complex. Private Tommy Kowalski stands in Guard Tower 7, sweating through his olive-drab uniform as he watches the prisoners in Compound C go about their evening routine. At 19, Tommy is too young to have seen combat overseas. A childhood bout of rheumatic fever left him with a heart murmur that kept him stateside. While his older brother Mike died on Omaha Beach and his best friend Johnny got shot down over Germany, Tommy got assigned to guard duty in Texas, watching the enemy from behind a fence. It should be boring work. The prisoners are supposed to be broken men, grateful for American food and shelter, content to wait out the war in relative comfort. But Tommy has been noticing things that don't add up, like the way certain prisoners are treated by their fellow Germans. How some men seem to live in constant fear, jumping at shadows, refusing to walk alone after dark. How others carry themselves with the arrogant bearing of men who still believe they're part of a master race, even behind barbed wire. And then there are the screams. They come at night, when the Texas heat finally breaks and the camp settles into an uneasy quiet. Not the usual sounds of men having nightmares or talking in their sleep, but something else entirely. Sounds of pain, of terror, of violence being done in the darkness between the barracks. When Tommy reports what he's hearing to Sergeant Morrison, the grizzled career soldier just shrugs. "Kraut settling scores," he says, not looking up from his paperwork. "Not our problem as long as they don't try to escape." But it becomes Tommy's problem 3 weeks later when he finds the body. The dead man is hanging from a rafter in Barracks 12, a crude noose around his neck made from torn bed sheets. The official report will list it as suicide, another broken German soldier who couldn't face the shame of defeat. But Tommy notices things the investigating officer doesn't. The bruises on the man's face that suggest a beating, the way his hands are positioned, as if he'd been tied up before he died, the strange symbol carved into the wooden post beside the body, a crude swastika with additional marks that Tommy doesn't recognize. Most disturbing of all is the reaction of the other prisoners. Instead of the shock and grief you'd expect when someone takes their own life, there's something else in their faces. Fear, yes, but also a kind of grim satisfaction among some of the men, as if justice has been served. That's when Tommy realizes that Camp Hearn isn't just a prison. It's a battlefield where the war is still being fought, German against German, with American guards as unwitting spectators to a campaign of terror that makes the official conflict look civilized by comparison. 5 miles away in the small town of Hearn, Texas, Nurse Sarah Mitchell is dealing with her own disturbing discoveries. Sarah works at the county hospital, a modest facility that serves the local farming community and increasingly the German prisoners from the camp who require medical attention beyond what the camp infirmary can provide. At 26, she's one of only 3 registered nurses in the county, a position that gives her access to information that others might miss. Like the pattern of injuries she's been seeing, the official reports always list the same causes: work accidents, falls, fights over card games. But Sarah has been a nurse for 5 years, and she knows the difference between an accident and deliberate violence. The German prisoners arriving at her hospital aren't suffering from random mishaps. They're showing signs of systematic torture, broken fingers that have been deliberately bent backward, burns that form specific patterns, as if someone has been using heated metal to brand flesh, cuts that are too precise, too methodical to be the result of fights or accidents. And always, the same look in their eyes, the hollow stare of men who have been broken, not just physically but spiritually. When she tries to talk to the prisoners about their injuries, they clam up immediately. Some refuse to speak at all. Others mutter in German, words she doesn't understand but that sound like prayers or confessions. One man, a former Wehrmacht sergeant named Klaus Weber, grabs her arm with surprising strength and whispers in broken English, "They have Gericht, court. They judge us all." Before she can ask what he means, Weber is dead. Heart failure, according to the camp doctor who comes to collect the body. But Sarah notices the small puncture wound on Weber's neck, barely visible unless you know what to look for. The kind of mark that might be made by a very thin blade, inserted with surgical precision. That night, Sarah drives out to Camp Hearn and requests a meeting with the commanding officer, Colonel James Patterson. Patterson is a career military man, a veteran of the First World War who spent his entire adult life in the army. He's competent by the book and completely out of his depth when it comes to understanding the psychological warfare being conducted under his nose. "Nurse Mitchell," he says, not looking up from the requisition forms he's signing, "I appreciate your concern, but these men are prisoners of war. They're not our responsibility beyond keeping them fed, housed, and healthy enough to work. Colonel, I think some of them are being murdered." That gets his attention. Patterson looks up, his weathered face creasing into a frown. "That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof?" Sarah describes the pattern of injuries, the suspicious deaths, the fear she sees in the prisoner's eyes. Patterson listens politely, but she can see he's already made up his mind. "Miss Mitchell, these are German soldiers. They've been fighting each other for 6 years. Some of them are Nazis, some are regular Wehrmacht, some are probably communists. Put them all together in close quarters, and there's bound to be friction. As long as they're not trying to escape or attacking American personnel, what they do to each other is their business." It's the same attitude Tommy encountered with Sergeant Morrison, and Sarah realizes with growing horror that the American authorities either don't understand what's happening in the camp or don't care. Either way, the result is the same. A group of fanatical Nazi prisoners has been given free rein to establish their own reign of terror, complete with judges, juries, and executioners. But Sarah Mitchell is not the kind of woman who gives up easily. Growing up on a Texas farm during the Depression taught her that sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when the authorities won't help. If the official channels won't listen, she'll find another way. That's how she ends up approaching Private Tommy Kowalski 3 days later, as he's finishing his shift at the camp gate. "You're the guard who found the body in Barracks 12, she says without preamble. Tommy looks around nervously. Talking to civilians about camp business is strictly forbidden, and he's already in hot water with his superiors for asking too many questions about the suicide. "I can't talk about that, Mom." "I'm not asking you to break any rules," Sarah says quickly. "I'm asking you to help me save lives, because if we don't do something, more men are going to die." She tells him about the pattern of injuries, the suspicious deaths, the fear she sees in the prisoner's eyes. Tommy listens with growing recognition. Everything she's describing matches what he's been observing from his guard tower. "There's something else," he says finally, looking around to make sure they're not being overheard. I've been watching them at night. Some of the prisoners they meet in secret. Always the same group, maybe 20 or 30 men. They gather in the space between barracks 8 and 9, where the lights don't reach. What do? I don't know. But afterwards, someone always gets hurt, or disappears, or dies. Sarah feels a chill that has nothing to do with the Texas evening. We need to find out what's happening in those meetings. That's impossible. I can't leave my post, and civilians aren't allowed in the camp after dark. Then we'll have to find another way. What neither of them realizes is that their conversation has been overheard by someone who reports directly to the secret tribunal operating in the camp. By morning, both Tommy and Sarah will be marked for elimination by the same group that has already killed dozens of their fellow prisoners. The Hidden Reich in Texas is about to defend itself, and two ordinary Americans are about to discover just how far Nazi fanaticism will go to protect its secrets. The tribunal calls itself the Ehrenrat, the Court of Honor. It operates according to principles that would be familiar to anyone who lived through the Nazi regime: absolute loyalty to the party, swift punishment for traitors, and the unwavering belief that some lives are worth more than others. The court was established 3 months after the first German prisoners arrived at Camp Herne, when it became clear that the American authorities had no interest in maintaining ideological purity among their captives. Wehrmacht soldiers were housed alongside SS officers, Hitler Youth fanatics shared barracks with communist sympathizers, and men who had spent years fighting each other on the Eastern Front were expected to coexist peacefully in Texas. For the true believers, this was intolerable. The leader of the tribunal is Oberfuhrer Heinrich Richter, a former SS officer who was captured during the final days of the war while trying to escape to South America with a suitcase full of stolen gold. At 45, Richter is old enough to remember the early days of the Nazi movement, when it was a small group of fanatics meeting in beer halls and plotting revolution. He understands that ideology is more powerful than armies, that true believers can accomplish more with dedication than entire divisions can achieve with weapons. Richter has spent his time in Camp Herne, carefully identifying and recruiting like-minded prisoners, building a network of informants and enforcers who share his vision of maintaining Nazi purity even in captivity. His followers include former Gestapo agents, SS guards from concentration camps, and Hitler Youth leaders who still believe that the thousand-year Reich will rise again. The tribunal operates with methodical efficiency. Suspected traitors are identified through a network of informants who monitor conversations, report suspicious behavior, and identify prisoners who speak favorably of their American captors or express doubts about Nazi ideology. The accused are given show trials that follow a perverted version of German military justice, complete with prosecutors, defenders, and judges who have already decided the verdict. The sentences are always the same: death, but the executions are designed to send a message. Some prisoners are found hanging in their barracks, apparent suicides that fool the American authorities but terrify the other Germans. Others suffer accidents during work details, falls from scaffolding, machinery malfunctions, encounters with farm equipment that leave them broken and bleeding. The most defiant are subjected to elaborate tortures that would make the Gestapo proud, their screams serving as warnings to anyone else who might consider betraying the cause. The Americans, focused on preventing escapes and maintaining basic order, miss the signs of what's really happening. They see the deaths as the inevitable result of putting enemy soldiers in close quarters, the injuries as workplace accidents, the fear as natural demoralization following Germany's defeat. They have no understanding of the ideological war being fought under their noses, no comprehension of how thoroughly Nazi doctrine has poisoned the minds of the true believers. This willful blindness is exactly what Richter is counting on. On the night of August 18th, 3 days after Sarah and Tommy's conversation, the tribunal convenes for its most important session yet. The meeting takes place in the basement of Barracks 8, a space that the prisoners have carefully soundproofed using stolen materials and techniques learned in the concentration camps. 27 men gather in the flickering light of improvised candles, their faces bearing the hard expressions of those who have seen too much death to be troubled by ordering more. Richter stands before a makeshift altar, decorated with Nazi symbols, crafted from scavenged materials. Behind him hangs a crude swastika flag, sewn from torn bedsheets, and dyed with blood from their victims. The ceremony that follows would be familiar to anyone who attended Nazi party rallies in the 1930s. The ritual chanting, the blood oaths, the fevered speeches about racial purity and ideological loyalty. But tonight's session has a special purpose. The tribunal has learned about the American nurse and the guard who are asking too many questions, and Richter has decided that the threat must be eliminated before it can spread. "Kameraden," he begins, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question, "we face a new challenge to our sacred mission. The Americans have discovered our work, and they seek to interfere with the justice we dispense in the name of the fatherland." He describes what his informants have told him about Sarah and Tommy, painting them as enemies of the Reich who must be dealt with swiftly and decisively. The assembled prisoners listen with the rapt attention of true believers, their faces reflecting the fanatic devotion that once conquered most of Europe. "The nurse will be easy," says Unterscharführer Karl Brenner, a former concentration camp guard who has become Richter's chief enforcer. "She comes to the camp hospital every Tuesday, an accident with medical supplies, perhaps a contaminated injection." "And the guard?" asks another prisoner. "More difficult, but not impossible. Americans are careless about security. They believe themselves safe in their own country. We will show them how wrong they are. The plan they develop is simple but effective. Sarah will be eliminated during her next visit to the camp hospital, her death made to look like an accident with experimental medications. Tommy will be killed during a staged escape attempt, shot down while supposedly trying to prevent German prisoners from fleeing. Both deaths will be explained away by the authorities, who have no interest in admitting that they've lost control of their own prison camp. But Richter has underestimated his opponents. Sarah Mitchell and Tommy Kowalski may be ordinary Americans, but they're also products of a culture that values individual initiative and moral courage. When they decide to investigate the secret tribunal, they bring resources and determination that the Nazi prisoners haven't anticipated. Tommy's breakthrough comes when he realizes that the meetings he's been observing follow a pattern. They always occur on nights when specific guards are on duty, guards who have been bribed or intimidated into looking the other way. By tracking the schedule and cross-referencing it with the timing of suspicious deaths, he's able to predict when the next tribunal session will take place. Sarah's contribution comes from her medical training and her access to the hospital records. By carefully analyzing the pattern of injuries and deaths, she's able to identify which prisoners are most likely to be targeted next. More importantly, she's able to document the evidence in a way that even the most willfully blind authorities will have to acknowledge. Working together, they develop a plan to expose the tribunal by documenting one of their sessions. Tommy will use his position as a guard to get close enough to photograph the meeting, while Sarah will prepare a comprehensive medical report that proves the deaths are murders, not accidents. It's a dangerous plan that could get them both killed, but they're driven by something stronger than fear, the knowledge that innocent men are dying while the authorities do nothing. On the night of August 21st, as the tribunal prepares for another session, Tommy and Sarah put their plan into action. Neither of them realizes that they're walking into a trap, that Richter's informants have already reported their activities, that the secret court has decided to make examples of them both. The hidden Reich in Texas is about to reveal its true nature, and two ordinary Americans are about to discover that evil doesn't need uniforms or official sanction to flourish. Sometimes all it needs is indifference from those with the power to stop it. August 21st, 1945, 11:47 p.m. Tommy Kowalski crouches in the shadows between barracks 7 and 8, his heart pounding so hard, he's sure the German prisoners can hear it from 50 yards away. He's carrying a camera borrowed from the camp's public information office, a bulky speed graphic that requires flash powder for night photography. The plan is simple: document the tribunal session, get the evidence to Sarah, and present their findings to authorities who can't ignore photographic proof of murder. What Tommy doesn't know is that Heinrich Richter has been expecting him. The tribunal session begins exactly as Tommy has observed before. 27 men gather in the basement of Barracks 8, their faces illuminated by flickering candles as they perform their perverted Nazi rituals. But tonight there's an additional element: 3 prisoners, bound and gagged, kneeling before Richter's makeshift altar like sacrificial offerings. Tommy recognizes one of them, a young Wehrmacht soldier named Hans Müller, who'd been captured at Normandy. Möller had made the mistake of expressing gratitude for American medical care after being wounded in a work accident. In the tribunal's twisted logic, this made him a traitor worthy of death. As Tommy adjusts his camera angle, trying to get a clear shot of the proceedings, Richter begins to speak. "Tonight we cleanse our ranks of weakness and betrayal," the former SS officer declares, his voice carrying the theatrical authority of a man who once commanded life and death in the concentration camps. "These men have forgotten their oath to the fatherland. They have embraced the lies of our enemies. They must pay the ultimate price." The trial that follows is a mockery of justice that would make a kangaroo court look fair by comparison. The accused are not allowed to speak in their own defense. The evidence against them consists entirely of hearsay and ideological purity tests. The verdict is predetermined, the sentence inevitable. Tommy's finger hovers over the camera's shutter release, knowing that the flash will expose his position but desperate to document what he's witnessing. As Richter raises a crude knife fashioned from a sharpened spoon, preparing to execute the first prisoner, Tommy makes his choice. The flash explodes like lightning, illuminating the basement in stark black and white. For a moment everyone freezes, the Nazi prisoners caught in their act of murder, Tommy exposed in the shadows with his camera, the bound victims staring with eyes that reflect both hope and terror. Then chaos erupts. "Amerikanischer Spion!" Richter screams, pointing directly at Tommy's position. "Kill him!" Tommy runs, crashing through the underbrush between the barracks as shouts erupt behind him. He can hear footsteps pounding after him, voices calling out in German, the sound of men who have nothing left to lose pursuing someone who threatens to expose their crimes. He makes it halfway to the guard tower before they catch him. The attack comes from 3 directions at once, prisoners who have slipped out of their barracks and positioned themselves along his escape route. Tommy fights back with the desperation of a man who knows his life depends on reaching safety. But he's outnumbered and surrounded by men trained in violence. A sharpened piece of metal slices across his ribs. A fist connects with his jaw, sending him sprawling into the dirt. Hands grab for the camera, trying to destroy the evidence of what he's witnessed. Tommy's salvation comes from an unexpected source, Sergeant Morrison, the same career soldier who had dismissed his earlier concerns about the prisoners. Morrison is making his routine midnight rounds when he hears the commotion, and his military instincts override his bureaucratic indifference. "What the hell is going on here?" Morrison bellows, his voice carrying the authority of 20 years in the army. The German prisoners scatter like roaches when the lights come on, disappearing back into their barracks with the practiced efficiency of men accustomed to avoiding authority. Tommy lies bleeding in the dirt, clutching his camera like a lifeline, while Morrison stares down at him with a mixture of confusion and growing anger. "Kowalski, you better have a damn good explanation for this." Meanwhile, 5 miles away at the county hospital, Sarah Mitchell is fighting her own battle for survival. She's working the night shift, treating a German prisoner who was brought in with what the camp doctor described as severe food poisoning. But Sarah's examination reveals something far more sinister. The man has been systematically poisoned with small doses of arsenic, probably administered over several weeks. As she works to stabilize his condition, the prisoner grabs her wrist with surprising strength. His name is Friedrich Weber, and he's the brother of Klaus Weber, the man who died after warning Sarah about the secret court. "Sie müssen, you must listen," he whispers in broken English, his voice barely audible over the sound of his labored breathing. "Mein Bruder, my brother. He tried to warn you. They killed him for it." "Who killed him?" "Die Ehrenrat, the honor court. They judge us all. And now they come for you." Before Sarah can ask what he means, the hospital's front door opens and 3 men enter. They're wearing civilian clothes, but Sarah recognizes them immediately as German prisoners from the camp. They move with the purposeful stride of men on a mission, their eyes scanning the hospital's layout with military precision. "Nurse Mitchell," the leader speaks with a slight accent, his English carefully practiced. "We are here to collect our comrade. The camp doctor has requested his immediate return." Sarah knows this is a lie. The camp doctor would never order a critically ill patient to be moved in the middle of the night, but she also knows that she's alone in the hospital except for one elderly orderly, and that these men have already proven their willingness to kill. "I'm sorry, but the patient is too ill to be moved," she says, trying to keep her voice steady. "He needs immediate medical attention." "I'm afraid that is not your decision to make." The man steps closer, and Sarah can see the crude knife hidden in his coat pocket. Behind him, his companions position themselves to block the exits. They've planned this carefully, just as they've planned all their other murders. But Sarah Mitchell grew up on a Texas farm, and she learned early that sometimes you have to fight for what's right. As the lead assassin reaches for his weapon, she grabs a bottle of surgical alcohol and throws it directly into his face. The man screams as the alcohol burns his eyes, stumbling backward into his companions. Sarah uses the confusion to run, racing through the hospital corridors toward the emergency telephone in the administrator's office. She makes it halfway before they catch her. The fight that follows is brief, but vicious. Sarah manages to sound the alarm before they drag her down, her screams echoing through the empty hospital corridors. By the time the local sheriff arrives, summoned by neighbors who heard the commotion, the German prisoners are gone, and Sarah is unconscious on the floor, beaten but alive. The reckoning comes at dawn. Tommy's photographs, developed in the camp's darkroom under Sergeant Morrison's supervision, provide undeniable evidence of the secret tribunal's activities. The images show Nazi prisoners conducting mock trials, preparing to execute fellow Germans, and maintaining the ideological apparatus of the Third Reich on American soil. Sarah's medical records, combined with her testimony about the systematic poisoning and the attack at the hospital, paint a picture of organized murder that even the most bureaucratic authorities can't ignore. Colonel Patterson, faced with evidence that his camp has become a killing ground, finally takes action. The FBI is called in, along with military intelligence officers who specialize in Nazi war crimes. Within hours, Camp Hearn is under lockdown, and a full investigation begins. Heinrich Richter and his followers are arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder. The evidence against them is overwhelming, not just Tommy's photographs and Sarah's medical records, but testimony from surviving prisoners who had been too terrified to speak before. The trials that follow reveal the full scope of the tribunal's activities. Over the course of 8 months, they had murdered 43 German prisoners, tortured dozens more, and established a reign of terror that turned an American POW camp into a miniature concentration camp. But the most chilling revelation comes from Richter himself, who shows no remorse for his actions, even when facing the electric chair. "You Americans," he says during his final interrogation, his voice filled with contempt, "you think you have won because you defeated our armies. But you understand nothing. The Reich is not a place or a government. It is an idea, and ideas cannot be killed by bullets or bombs." He's wrong, of course. Ideas can be defeated, but only by people who are willing to stand up and fight for what's right. People like Tommy Kowalski and Sarah Mitchell, who risked their lives to expose the truth when the authorities preferred comfortable lies. The secret tribunal at Camp Hearn is broken up, its members executed or imprisoned for life. The surviving prisoners are transferred to other facilities, where they are kept under closer supervision. The camp itself is eventually closed, its buildings demolished, its history buried in classified files that won't be opened for decades. But the lesson remains: evil doesn't need official sanction to flourish. Sometimes all it needs is indifference from those with the power to stop it. And sometimes the only thing standing between civilization and barbarism is the courage of ordinary people who refuse to look away when others are suffering. The story of Camp Hearn reminds us that the fight against fascism didn't end with Germany's surrender. It continues wherever people choose ideology over humanity, wherever they decide that some lives are worth more than others, wherever they use fear and violence to silence those who dare to speak the truth. Tommy Kowalski and Sarah Mitchell were ordinary Americans who found themselves facing extraordinary evil. They could have looked the other way, could have decided that it wasn't their problem, could have chosen safety over justice. Instead, they chose to act, and their courage saved lives and exposed a conspiracy that the authorities wanted to keep hidden. That's what we explore here, the moments when ordinary people do extraordinary things, when courage triumphs over cowardice, when the light of truth pierces the darkness of willful ignorance. If you believe these stories matter, if you want to join us in uncovering the hidden chapters of history that reveal both the worst and best of human nature, then subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because there are so many more stories like this one, waiting to be told with the honesty and respect they deserve. You won't want to miss what we discover next.